Now the floor is open, and Kaligama, yeah. So very focused, and I think we are having now roughly 45 minutes, and we can have a 45 minutes time taken very engagefully, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for those presentations and the intervention by the discussants. I would like to make a few points based on my personal experience. Our institute started as a purely research institute. In the early days, advocacy was not in our agenda. We embarked on advocacy only after about 12 to 13 years of existence. Then, when it came to balancing research and advocacy, we felt that advocacy, though related to research, we had to introduce a totally new approach. And some of those points came up in your comments, Oliver. Now, I come from a semi-government independent economic policy research institute. Now, these are the points that we faced. You see, we in the institute, the research staff cannot get fully involved with advocacy. You must have a information and communication division within the institute and communication professionals recruited, of course, who will closely collaborate with the researchers, and if they are appearing in the media, yes, the researcher will appear in the media, but the communication officer will advise what are things not to say, because he or she will be a professional and will be sensitive towards, what the masses are thinking about this particular issue. Because most of the time, advocacy is, you're going to an area, you're talking about area which you do not know. So the perceived risks are high under the new policy regime. So you have to speak to say that, the risks are minimum, advantages are maximum, etc., etc. Then you also made a very valid statement. You see, sometimes in developing countries, the message has to go through the local language. The English-speaking community may be already convinced that this is the policy and the way forward. But the majority are the local-speaking language, and to them sending the message, if you just give your paper to a journalist, etc., they can distort and write it with lot of sentimental stuff, etc. It is best to give a press statement, and you have to undertake the translation. Don't allow them to do the translation, because they will add their tits and bits and dilute the whole message. The other point I would like to make is that, you see, when you are doing this is the last point, advocacy and research, there can be, especially I'm talking about the short-term advocacy, and you made that important distinction between short-term and long-term. Short-term advocacy, there can come a point of diminishing returns on advocacy, and that can sometimes disturb your research areas also. That happens, you see, when you find that, especially for a semi-government institution, you see, if you feel that the policy establishment is not at that particular time prepared to take that policy with them and to stand by you, the think tank can come into an uncomfortable situation, because you see, if there is a lot of resistance against that policy, because always we find, the winners of a policy are scattered and not organized. The losers can be in a minority, but they are very well organized and they have a very good handle over the media. And they will spend enough in the media to, if there are, say, a trade protectionist lobby, to maintain that protection. I'm now talking on the economic side, to maintain that protection. So in such a situation, you see, when you find that your advocacy is not bringing you returns, sometimes it will be better to switch to another area and focus your attention, especially for a semi-government institution, because you can become vulnerable and it could also disturb your research program. I mean, I have examples to give you, but due to lack of time, I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, the moderator. Now, I think the question we are trying to answer is how advocacy affects the quality of the research that we do. That's to say, in many of the think tanks, the researchers have a tradition of, working with data, working with facts, and then is focused, is glued to that from theory, from what others have done. And then we have this big issue, advocacy, which is not necessarily based on anything rigorous. It could be just an idea picked up. Somebody's passionate about it, and you think you want to drive it on. So the challenge is, how does that affect the quality of the research that we do? And to my mind, from all the presentations, you find that there is no clear-cut answer. There are issues of where do you put resources, both in terms of money, in terms of human beings that are really working. And from my own institute, we had some bit of experience over the years, like the other speaker said. We've been a think tank focused on research. Advocacy has not been an issue for us. But in recent times, we tried to bring in some advocacy into it. And we discovered that advocacy is very expensive. Very, very expensive. You do a research that costs, let's say, $10,000, and you want to do an advocacy. An advocacy, you discover that you are spending in terms of about $20,000 to bring people together, to bring media and all those stuff. So there are issues of resources that, where do you want to put the resources? And I think there are no easy solutions. One solution is, like he said, to have a unit within the organization where their focus is on how to ensure that when the researcher finishes his work, they connect with the outsider. Well, that model may not be so efficient because you can't really communicate well if you are not part of the work, if you are not the one that really come out. You are not the one that you are not the one that has the message. And as such, I think one thing that would be helpful is for researchers to begin to think about impact. So that when you start a work, right from the word go, you are thinking about what impact would that make on society. And if that is the case, you find the advocacy issues will have a place in the research. And as such, by the time you finish the research, you are not done yet. There is still something that is driving you that says a part of that output has to make some impact, some influence. And that's why I appreciate the second presenter, I think, Godber, the slide he gives where it starts from the research and it ends up in advocacy. If the researcher thinks that way, you find that there will be a more tendency that at the end of the day, there will be some bits of advocacy. So that it now depends on the resources you have, how you allocate the resources. What resources of money and human beings, how much do you put on research? How much do you put on all those various stages until you get to the point of advocacy? So that I think this much I would like to say now, but there are really no easy answers as to how to really balance advocacy and research. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Those were three very good presentations. I'm sorry that I missed the discussants' interventions as I have to go to another session and listen to them as well. You can't be in two space at the same time, unfortunately. But taking on cue from all the three presentations, I just wanted to make a couple of observations relating to the presentation as they have come through. The one particular issue, when we come to balance research with advocacy, there is sometimes a feeling which goes around that objective researchers are supposed to be Martians without values. They are supposed to be, they're so hostage to facts that they don't have any judgment in a societal relationship which is afflicted by asymmetric power relationship. So are we researchers for research's sake, or is it really about the changing the world? If it is so, then it is very obvious that you're going to have some kind of a value system. And I'm not alluding to the fact, I'm not really implying that one will have to be partisan in that sense, in the political, organized politics sense. So let's be clear on that. And even when I find colleagues mention that policy is working for the people, I get confused which people we are referring to. You see, I have lots of people around my household and around in my block. They all own, they are almost all with two-car family now. So are we referring to that people? So we have to be very clear on this particular point, that what value system you're pursuing and what exactly is the people, what people you are meaning. To me, in an asymmetric power relationship, in a social relation, in a country where there is so much disparity and inequality, so you are really trying to be helpful to those disadvantaged section of the people. Let us be clear about that and not pretend that we are such objective people like that doing research in a sanctimonious way. Let us be very honest about it. If we are trying to do that, then essentially we are perpetuating the existing power system, power relationship, and that's how we look within the paradigm. This is one of the points I would like to emphasize. The second point is that when we talk about the stakeholders, and even this, all these three presentations have come through, at least appear to me like that. The stakeholders are the policymakers. No, we have had in the morning the discussion about the so-called mythical policymaker. Now, it is all about who exactly is located how in the policy process. All the discussion have been about the upstream policymakers. And at best, those who are in the vertical sense at the same level with you, with the policy think tanks. I haven't heard much about the downstream policymakers. The only time the discussion came up is in my the colleague's presentation from Uganda, I guess. Isn't that so? Yes, that you said that we need to, if it doesn't work, we will have to do it by creating the demand side, as if by default. I found that is a back-ended support to the poor people. I found, to my mind, any research advocacy balance is all about working both upstream and downstream, because it is also about the citizens getting the right information and creating the accountability and more transparency in the policy process. So it should not come that when the ruling policymakers do not listen to us, only then we go and generate the support and et cetera, et cetera. My experience is the most sustainable way of making a medium-term changes in policy is investing in the people with the information, much more than investing in the Secretary of the Ministry. Because the Secretary of the Ministry is a time server, he will leave. But those people in the local government, they will stay. So that would be the other point. My last point is more technical, it's nothing to do with my two observations here is that, one is that we all talked about the direct outreach through advocacy to the policymakers. But our experience is that it works also better and sustainably when you work indirectly through conduits, the most interest group in a certain change. I haven't found here in the stakeholders group any mention about the private sector. Maybe that's an oversight, maybe it is included in the civil society. Some people also describe civil society in a broad way with media and business, but business is a very important conduit for me. I would have leveraged my policy impact through the business group. And the other outreach issue is, which I found very effective from our own experience, we extensively use electronic media. We use extensively electronic media, starting from talk shows, press briefings, direct telecast. Our institute does enjoy that kind of credibility and visibility. And in a country with semi-illiterate people, where half of the people are not literate, who cannot read print media, 24 hours news channels are much more effective to reach out to them, and that will also reduce a part of the cost which has been mentioned here, because then it's the public or the private money which will underwrite my outreach program. Thank you very much for the attention.
Let me just make a very quick intervention on some of the issues that have been raised. And one is related to argue, because I may be wrong, that information communication or policy communication, policy outreach is not advocacy. These are two different things. So the colleagues who talked about, communication departments, teams of people working in our institutions, and they are communicating policy issues. They are communicating our research. They are communicating policy ideas. They are doing outreach. But they are not doing advocacy. Because advocacy is really, it's advocating. You are advocating for someone. You are advocating for disadvantaged groups. And because you are really not advocating with the policymakers, you are advocating for the beneficiary audience, which is your target. And I think that's the point that I was trying to make at the end of my presentation, that at the end of the day, if we are talking about access to agriculture advisory services, or access to water, or access to healthcare, there are certain audiences that we are trying to advocate for. And the research and the evidence we are generating is to try to actually not only to get policymakers to respond to the deficiencies in service delivery, but as I said, you can also get the beneficiary audiences and their local representatives to actually demand for action from the policymakers. So I think, in my view, we need to be able to make that distinction. Secondly, I think there's a colleague who talked about, advocacy that is not based on anything. Advocacy that is not based on anything is not advocacy. It is activism. That you do research, and because of the research, and I think the last speaker talked about value propositions. Because of the research, because I am informed through the research about what the issues are, what the policy questions are, I can competently talk about those issues, sit with the policymakers and say, actually, this is how you address the problem. Now, the issues, are you being biased or not? I think on policy positions, on policy responses, I want to be biased by the research that I have undertaken and by the evidence that I have generated, and be able to talk for those policy positions. Now, of course, the situation shifts if you talk about partisan issues, which now takes you into pure partisan politics. But if we are saying, if I have done my analytical work and said, no, actually, the financing for healthcare is not sufficient, then I should be able to advocate for increasing financing to healthcare. And I think that's not biased. It's informed by the analysis and the evidence that I've generated. So I think that I would really argue that advocacy that is not based on research, that is not based on evidence, I would call that activism. And that is not for policy think tanks. That's for different. There are actually groups that are also engaged in activism, but they do research. The difference between those groups and think tanks is that for activist organizations, even when they have done research, they don't negotiate on the policy positions. They will say, as far as we are concerned, this river must flow to the east. It doesn't matter whether that is a steep slope. That is their point, and they will argue for that. I think that is more of activism than policy advocacy.
I want to talk polite, but very concrete. I have two comments. The first is always we need money, but always it's possible to have spaces, for example, in the press, in the TV, in the radio. The important is the information, the fresh information, and the disposition, institutional or personal, with the journalists. And my second point is about with the people. The people is, in my country is important, no is only number or other idea. The people is part of the solution. Is part in the research.
Just one more point I would like to add, which is about the additional workload on researchers when we undertake advocacy. I mean, even when we have staff dedicated for communication and advocacy, at some point they do have to bank on the key researchers in selected sectors. You know, for instance, if we are engaging with a number of stakeholders in any particular sector, then beyond a point, the staff who are specializing in communication and advocacy might not have the required level of expertise to deal with the subject matter. And in my experience, it does put more pressure on the researchers, and that is also something which I think adds to the workload in terms of the human resources. So even when we have dedicated units or dedicated staff, we can't avoid the fact that, you know, trying to undertake serious advocacy does, you know, add to the workload of the core research staff. And also in terms of simplifying the messages and all, in my experience, I felt that, you know, the author themselves are the best people to be able to simplify it. So if I have written something, I am the best placed within my organization to also simplify the message. I can't, although we do expect the advocacy staff to be able to do that, but without my support, without my time, they might not be able to do that. So these things also add to the workload.
Yeah, no, I think I just missed out one point which I think could be controversial and could enlist comment, and that's the issue raised by Oliver. Whether we actually talked about the balancing research and advocacy. And I just wanted to mention that actually the question of balancing for me is the problem, because you don't need to balance anything. We have two constants here, which is research and impact. In between the research and impact, there are various things that you need to do, which is influencing policy, doing outreach, doing advocacy. For me, these are variables, and therefore, how much emphasis you put on those is going to depend on how you have determined the attainment of the impact that you want.